Hi there, it's Carl Irwin, the Common Magician, and I've got something interesting to discuss with you. And this is going to be a long one, probably a long one. I have a number of videos on the channel that are comprehensive topics, or as comprehensive as I can make it, as much information as I can share based on what I know, which is limited. I don't know everything about anything, but I'm willing to share everything I do know about most things, right? So this is going to be a comprehensive discussion on Equivoque. We've talked about Equivoque before. I've had a lot to say about Equivoque. I've written a little bit about Equivoque. I use it an awful lot. I enjoy it as a method, maybe not as an exclusive method, but certainly as a part of a method in a presentation. And I think if you can find ways to incorporate even poorly executed Equivoque as an extra layer, I think you're better off. We're going to talk about what is poorly executed Equivoque, and we're going to talk about what are some better principles to follow. We'll even talk about some deeper types of Equivoque that you may have heard of. We're gonna be as comprehensive as possible. So I will talk about things I've already mentioned on the channel before in other videos and in some other writings. In my book on Any Card, Any Number, I spend a big chunk talking about Equivoque and some of my feelings about that. We'll talk a little bit about those ideas as well. But I really want to put all in one place kind of my personal final word on it that I can point back to. And this won't be the last time we talk about Equivoque, but this will be the most we talk about it on the channel. So first of all, how do you pronounce it? How do you pronounce it? So it is, in fact, and I've got a lot of notes here. I actually have my computer here with pages of notes to follow. It is properly pronounced as Equivoque. Equivoque. Equivoque is an artichoke, right? But I personally, as you've heard already, I pronounce it as Equivoque. So it has the K on the end. I say it as Equivoque as in it sounds classy this way, right? I like that sound. Max Maven once mused that the K pronunciation is the magician's way of identifying a meaning and purpose for the word that is unique to magic. So even though it's really pronounced Equivoque, magicians, I think, and he seems to think, and I like this, I kind of agree with this, he thinks that we use this pronunciation as a way to differentiate it from its normal use. And then we now have a use for it that points to a method, actually, a magical method. So whenever we hear someone say Equivoque, or we say Equivoque, we know exactly what it is and what it does as a method. And I kind of like that explanation. So moving on, all right? The next section here in our discussion, I'll call it Equivoque, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So the good. Equivoque is a hands-off, spectator-driven procedure that heavily implies control through participation and decision-making on the part of the spectator. Such a method can go very far in covering layers of physical manipulations or sleights, meaning that it'll bury any kind of physical manipulation that may have to be going on, or any sleights that you have to do. It can help to kind of hide that within a trick, or even so far as to eliminate the need for any other kind of method. Equivoque can do that. It can actually be the only method that's there. Equivoque is also, you got to understand it as zero risk in outcome, as opposed to these kind of chance of higher probability assigned to responses, right? These things that are called psychological subtleties, Banachek refers to, or psychological tendencies in free choice. That approach is erroneously called psychological forcing. Those are not really forces. What they are is just an understanding that people have a tendency, for a variety of reasons, psychological reasons, or more likely cultural reasons, to prefer certain options when given a choice. And that's not a force. that's just a tendency, and knowing about tendencies allows us to take advantage of them. Okay, this is not like that. It's not like saying, think of a flower and think of a color and you get rose and red, right? More often than not, you'll get those two things when associated together. That's a tendency. That's not a force. You're not forcing anybody to do anything. You're taking advantage of the tendency. Equivoque is not that. Equivoque is surefire. It's absolute. It absolutely will end up as you anticipate it to end up. So that is the good. The bad. Equivoque is completely observable. This is the bad. This is the worst thing about it. It doesn't matter if it's well executed. It doesn't matter if it's really deeply constructed. It doesn't matter really anything about it. The fact of the matter is that there's nothing actually hidden in Equivoque. Concealing the bait and switch nature of classical Equivoque requires tactic skills and a little bit of wishful thinking, beyond the scope of the method itself. We have to indulge in some wishful thinking when we assume that Equivoque will work because it is completely observable. Okay, that's the bad. That's the bad. And that is the reason why people don't like to use it, is because it seems obvious to them. Because it's all seen. The ugly, because it's observable, it can be obvious, and it does seem like a bait and switch kind of a tactic. Even if the decision is to move something versus pick it up, the inevitable arbitrary follow-up direction to keep or set aside can quickly generate a sense of inconsistency in many cases, right? So the way it works is, you ask them to do something, and then immediately, and we'll talk about this later, there's an additional directive that switches everything on the spectator. And almost in almost every case, at least 50% of the time, that will happen. As additional cycles of classical Equivoque are layered, even if the choices through action are never repeated, the sense of inconsistency will exponentially grow, right? You do one layer and you're okay. You do another layer and then there's some suspicion, even if it's not fully appreciated. But once you go to the next layer, there's an exponential increase in suspicion as this goes along, even if each layer is completely different. That's the ugly. It gets ugly. It gets ugly quick because it's all observable, right? Now, here's the thing. If the bad quality of open observation can be made irrelevant, if the fact that everything can be observed can somehow be rendered not relevant, it doesn't matter if it can be observed. It just isn't a concern. If that can be dealt with in some way to remove it as a problem, and if the ugliness of inconsistency can be eradicated, if we can get rid of the ugly part of it, the bait and switch element there that can be observed and caught, then perhaps the goodness, the good part of it, the power and accuracy in Equivoque can come to the foreground. So the goal is kind of to deal with the bad and the ugly and just kind of keep the good side of it. This is surefire. And it feels like it's fair. We want that stuff to be at the end. It's a surefire way to do things linguistically without having to do any other kind of manipulation. If we want that, if we can get that to be the only thing that's left, we're in a really good place. So in order to elevate and expand the best qualities of Equivoque, we will need to examine and accentuate other strong methods that overlap with Equivoque itself. Okay, so let's go to some of those issues. So multiple outs, right? Multiple outs are kind of a cog in the machine. It's like an element of Equivoque. Equivoque actually depends on the mechanics of several other devices that figuratively make up the whole machine. At its core, Equivoque is built on ambiguity. That is kind of the main part of the machine. That's the main element. That's the engine that makes it work. While a spectator is asked to make a concrete decision of some kind, the way in which that decision will be used is rendered unknown until the moment of its use. There's that ambiguity of how will this be applied until after the decision is made. When the use to keep or rid is entirely divorced from the choice, we see the badness and the ugliness bubble up to the surface again, right? In addition to ambiguity, the device of multiple outs is inherent to all equivoque. When we think about multiple outs, we usually imagine a scenario where one of a small set of free choices is made, and the performer has accounted for every possible outcome in the small set. In this way, a trick with a free choice among 5 possibilities is actually 5 different effects, where only one effect can be demonstrated at the end, and the other 4 are hidden. They just go unseen. Right? You're just the spectator is essentially choosing how the trick is going to end whenever you're using multiple outs. With equivoque, though, the concept of multiple outs is reversed, where only one effect is arranged for at least 2 possible choices that have the same outcome in common due to the layer of ambiguity that is within the scenario. Right? So ultimately, the device of ambiguity can be made more useful if the binary outs are more finely tuned. If we can really finely tune these possible outs, which are linguistic, not in a final presentation sense, but in the linguistic sense, if we can finely tune this, we can really improve our equivoque dramatically, right? Dealing with the multiple out aspect of it. And we're going to talk about that later, that using multiple outs with equivoque is a really good strategy. But you can understand the best way to do multiple outs and apply that understanding to equivoque itself and improve it. One way, of course, to do this is to make the meanings between 2 choices mean the exact same thing. So the meanings don't mean 2 different things at all, but the choice A or choice B actually ends up meaning the same thing, but that is not fully appreciated until the revelation of what the choice meant. So that is an avenue that we're going to look at. Conditional decisions. Okay, so this is the next topic. Conditional decisions. So what do I mean by that? Usually the word conditional refers to an outcome based on a set of prerequisites, right? A conditional surrender. I surrender under these conditions, right? But for this discussion, what I mean by conditional decisions is it'll refer to the decision of a condition, decisions of a condition, or a decision for a condition. As an example, one could choose to look in their kitchen, right? And you see a sink full of dirty dishes. And you could choose to rinse off the dishes in the sink, or you could let them stack up higher. And this decision creates one of 2 or more, but at least 2 that I can think of possible conditions, right? You can have a clean kitchen or you can have a messy kitchen. It's you're creating a condition, a situation, an environment based on the decision. You're not really making a selection process. You're making a condition. High-level equivoque acts depend on such conditional observations rather than possession to drive the sequence of choices. So, for example, with Joshua Jay's Inferno, if you know that trick, and I'm not going to expose the trick, but if you know the method, the trick and the method, the condition there is about the consequences of burning something with a match. You have a matchbox, and you have, the topic is about matches, and you talk about burning cards. Playing cards is what it is, right? And what it is you're actually making decisions about the condition of the cards, burning them. And that matters for the meaning of the method. In that case, that's really high-level application that we're talking about. With Dedi Corbusier's free will principle, the governing principle in the plot resides in who has ownership of the prediction slip, which is actually not a decision that is ever made by the spectator. The spectator doesn't decide who reads the slip. That's arbitrarily forced, but that's actually what drives the meaning of the decisions that have been made. That's really high level. It's conditional. It's high level equivoque. The conditions, the decisions that create conditions are what actually generate the meaning. This is of interest to us. We want to think about this a whole lot more than we think about having a spectator decide something or select or pick or choose. We want to try to eliminate choices and selections and replace it with designations of conditions, if that makes sense. This seems kind of highbrow, but I promise you this will all come down to some concrete examples here. But you need to understand the concepts before we can go further. Position and equivoque is the enemy of the method, right? When someone is told to, if you say, I have a dime and a nickel, and I say pick up one, as soon as they pick one up, they have possession. This is possession. We try to convince ourselves that it's not possession, that it's better than saying pick one. If I say pick one, that's possession, obviously. But if I say pick up one, this is still possession. It's very much possession because they're holding it, right? Possession is the enemy. Possession is the enemy. We want to avoid spectators possessing anything in any way, shape, or form. We want not to do that. We want to make sure that our sequence never has a moment where they are accidentally possessing anything. Okay? Possession is the point, though. I have to point that out. Possession is the point of equivocate, but only at the end. The only time we want them to possess something is when we get to the very last reveal. We want them to feel at the very end that they absolutely possess the final conclusion. When there's only one thing left, and one thing left, period, there's only that one thing, then and only then do we want the sensation of possession. But we do not want to have it until we get to that point. Okay? So it's something we want to get to, but we want to avoid it until it's absolutely necessary and helpful to have it. Additionally, as discussed earlier, the inconsistency of possession at each phase renders the method ugly. So we want to try to get rid of that ugliness part of it. Our goal is to replace as much of the concept of possession as we can with the concept of condition, as I said. Additionally, we want to avoid switching in any concept of possession that cannot be logically derived from the condition that is chosen. As an example, I could ask you to imagine a cluttered shed, right, in your backyard. The shed, your backyard shed, and it's cluttered, it's messy. I could ask you to make a choice to either remove the old bicycle that nobody rides or take out the yard game in there that nobody plays. That's your choice, right? Regardless of your choice, I can point out that the shed is now more organized. Doesn't matter what choice you made. I come to the same end. It has nothing to do with the items that you took. It has to do with the condition of the shed, right? Which was the premise that I set up. You can kind of, this seems very abstract, but it's just an example, okay? The point actually was something other than the possession of something or the choice of identifying a thing. I also have the freedom in this scenario to designate what is to be done next because I have established a conditional premise that we expect to be altered by your decision, right? I did not tell you to throw out one item. I didn't tell you to throw the bike out. I said remove the bike that nobody rides, or remove the bocce balls or the lawn darts or the cornhole, lawn game that nobody plays. I just said remove it from the shed, but I did not tell you to do anything with it. You could take the bike out and I could say, now clean it up and ride it. Right? In one sense, I can logically derive that you've removed it as in you've discarded it, but I can also equally logically derive that you removed it to use it. Both of these are very logical. It's not a bait and switch. It is not pick up one and give it to me, or pick up one and set it with the others. In that case, there's always two things that are happening. There's pick up one, which is giving you possession, and that's not good. And then I switch. I've baited you and now I switch. Now put it over there. Where'd that come from? Like, I didn't expect that. I didn't know what I was going to do with this. Whenever I use this other example and I say, you have this dirty, cluttered shed, you can either take out the bicycle that no one rides, or you could take out the cornhole set that nobody plays. Your choice, right? And you can make that choice, but I can logically derive what I do next either way. I can have you throw out the bike when you take it out, or I can have you clean it up. It makes sense. There's a narrative there that gives me a logical derivative, okay? We want possession to be discovered through the process of making decisions that are unrelated to possession. But rather, we want to focus on conditions, okay? So that is the concept of conditional decisions, making decisions that set up conditions rather than possession. Covert congruence. Big words. Covert congruence. Hidden similarity, right? The mathematical concept of congruence refers to a similarity and sameness between two things that are not necessarily or at least entirely the same. As we look at the binary choices that are presented in Equivoque, we recognize that the goal is to differentiate two outcomes from each other as being entirely different. That is the goal. However, what if we could create a choice between binary conditions that logically end to the same place with just a little bit of additional insight, right? So, for example, to go back to the shed thing, right? I could have you throw out the old bicycle, or I could have you discard the unused yard game. But with either choice, as I said before, the outcome is a more organized or clutter-free shed. It's the same end, right? So there is a covert, a hidden congruence between the two decisions. It doesn't matter if you make this decision or if you make this decision. I can design a situation where either decision that you make actually gives me the same end, a logical end that I'm looking for. Is there a way that we can design this kind of concept of congruence between either decision and make sure that it's hidden? And it's still hidden even after it's revealed. One doesn't necessarily recognize that I could have made the other decision and ended up in the same place. But if you can design something in this way, that's a good thing. That's a very good place to be. We'll talk about that in a concrete ways here in a minute. Classic Equivoque already tries to accomplish this by providing vague instructions. Like I said, pick up one, followed by the surprise directive, and put it over there. Okay, it tries to do that, but it fails pretty miserably, I think, in the classical sense. It doesn't really do it because the surprise directive is just so new and off base. It's just completely divorced. It has no relationship to the action. It doesn't logically derive. But it's still the same end, either way you do it. And in classic Equivoque, the end always looks like this. The one I want and the one I don't want. When I ask them to pick one up, I either have them put it where I don't want it, or I have them put it where I want it. I end up in the same place every time, and it tries to give that congruence, but it isn't covert. It's pretty obvious, and it's ugly, okay? We want to eliminate surprise directives. We want to get rid of that and make congruence something that is natural. It's natural to the directive. Hopefully you're staying with me. If not, that's fine. If you're not staying with me, that's okay. Because it means that you're not really into this and you don't have to know about the method. Okay. Next one, establishing congruent conditions. How do we make them? How do we establish them? Okay. And you might be saying, this all sounds so wonderful, Carl. It sounds great. I have no idea what you're saying, but it sounds wonderful. You might be asking yourself, how in the world can we do this in a reliable and a natural way? How do you do this naturally? How do you manage that, right? Equivoque is already procedural and terribly awkward. If you've ever done it and you've had enough layers of it, you know how awkward it can be and how procedural it feels, right? So how does this make it any better, right? Won't this approach convolute the process? That might be a question you have. So my answer to all of these concerns resides in replacing the traditional concept of selection, right, which leads to possession, with an alternative concept of organization. In our Equivoque, we shouldn't be having them make selections. We should have the spectator organize things. If they're merely organizing things and sorting stuff, and whether they're doing it actually with items or they're organizing and sorting mentally, either way, if they're doing sorting principles and they're organizing stuff, then we can create congruent conditions a lot better. It's when they're making choices that they're making possession. And possession can't be made congruent with non-possession. You just can't do it. It's not possible to do that. Okay, so if we replace selection with this idea of organization, we can establish congruent conditions. Okay. So how does this look like in real life? What does this look like? How do we get to this flexibility of categories from sorting? Well, here one thing I thought about is this. We don't want filtration, and we don't want a sifting process where we narrow down to one thing. We want organization that we can freely arbitrate. During the COVID-19 pandemic, right, during 2020, particularly in 2020 at the very beginning, the word isolation was frequently used. The word isolate is fascinating to me because it was used for both the sick and the well. The use of this word was applied to both equally, right? People that were sick were directed to isolate. If you're sick, isolate yourself. Okay. But people that were perfectly well were told you need to go isolate with your family, with your cohort, right? Be in isolation. That's what we're told. And equally in the same way, people that were perfectly well but were exposed to the illness. They were perfectly well, but they had exposure. Well, they were told you need to isolate. Everybody was told to isolate. Everybody. Doesn't matter what you were. And what was curious about this is that it had a different meaning because the application was different. If someone is sick and you tell them to isolate, obviously the meaning there is so that you would not transmit your sickness to anybody else. The sickness could die a death inside of you as your immune system takes over, makes you well, and then it doesn't get passed on to anybody else. That was the purpose of isolation. But likewise, people that were perfectly well were told to isolate so that you would not get exposure yourselves, right? Or because you feel well, but we learned with the sickness that you could actually feel well and be ill. You could be non-symptomatic. So you need to isolate. And then the obvious one there in between is you're perfectly well, but you were exposed. Well, there's a chance that you might be sick and you may be non-symptomatic, or you may be very early in your illness and you're asymptomatic and you don't have symptoms yet. You need to isolate. This word just applied to everybody. This is like the kind of words that we're looking for. That's a kind of word we want. We want words like that, where the meaning has a natural, can be naturally derived in a number of different directions. Those are the types of words we want to use. Okay, it's a great word to make congruent conditions, because in all cases, when the word isolate was used, you ended up in the same place, even though the purpose was slightly different for everybody. It kind of reminds me. It reminds me of. I like to watch movies, and there's like there's this exchange that happens in movies where someone is like in witness protection. They're in the witness protection program, right? And they say something like, "I'm being held prisoner," and then inevitably somebody else says, "But it's for your protection," right? You know this line, this exchange. It's in, I don't know, dozens of movies. That's another example, right? The idea of being a prisoner and the idea of being protected by a security detail, these are absolutely different, but there's a sense in which they have a congruent condition. They actually end up in the same place because there's restriction that's being put in place. There's security that's being put in place. There's armament that's part of that. You're not allowed to do things. You're not free. There's a lack of freedom, in both. It's a congruent condition, even though the two sides are completely different. Again, that's kind of what we're looking for situationally. We want to set that up and find words to do that. A concrete way to demonstrate this is I could ask you a question. I have two books. Pretend these are books, decks of cards, but I've got two books sitting on a coffee table, and I say, which would you like to remove from the coffee table? The complete works of William Shakespeare, or the full volume set of Lord of the Rings? Which one would you like to remove from the coffee table, right? This creates zero assumption of possession, and it creates a congruent outcome. It doesn't matter which way this goes. It implies nothing. I have total freedom to go wherever I want to. In fact, it not only implies congruence, it also implies two simultaneous contrasting truths. If I say remove one and you remove this one from the coffee table, that's a directive. I did not say pick one, and I didn't say pick one up. I said, what would you like to remove from the coffee table? This is the situational condition. Remove from the coffee table. This is the action. I remove this one from the coffee table. Now, as a book, I could say, great. Now open it up. That's a logical step. But the same logical step is, which one would you like to remove? And you remove this one, and I say, great. So we've got this book here. That's a logical step because you did remove it. After all, that's what the word was remove. Removing from the table means to focus on. But removing from the table also means to take away. There's a congruency. Both situations mean the same thing. Either this is taken to be looked at or it's taken to be discarded. This is left to be looked at or it's left to be forgotten. Either way. Okay, so we've created congruence that is naturally congruent conditions for both that are naturally derived. I don't have to bait and switch. It's not a switch. This is not pick it up and set it over there. It's only pick it up, and then I focus wherever I want. Which one would you like to remove from the coffee table? Oh, remove that one. Okay, take a good look at that. I did not switch them. It's not bait and switch. I just moved on. Take a look at that. Now the focus is here. Which one would you like to remove from the coffee table? Great. Let's take a look at this book that's remaining here. It's perfectly logical. There's no bait and switch going on. Okay, we have congruent conditions either way we do it. Right. So that's the first example that we have. Okay, I have a circumstance and a situation. I have an environment. I have a geographic location. I did not say point to one. If you're trying to get into a book test where you need to force a book, like the Hoy book test is a famous one. The Jerks actually mentioned this once in a write-up. Similar kind of idea. This is a perfect example of how you do it. I mean, they can change their mind. You could say, which one would you like to remove from the coffee table? They take that one. They've already done it. And you say, would you like to change your mind? You can change your mind. Sure, yeah, I'll change my mind. Okay, great. And then I can naturally do whatever I want to do at this point. I do not add a switch directive. I don't say that now, get rid of that. I don't say now, set that over there. I say now, focus. Here or there doesn't matter. Okay, that's what we're after. Removal is the word. That's how this works. This works because the word is remove. Remove is like isolate. It's a similar kind of ambiguous term, right? To isolate something. I've got 2 books sitting here on the coffee table. Let's isolate one of them, right? And they say this one here, and you say, great. Let's isolate that one, and here we have this, right? Or great, let's isolate this one. And then we look at it. I have not switched on them. That's not bait and switch. It's directive and natural outcome. And it can be both, one way or the other. I'm completely free. And it feels okay. It feels okay. It's almost impossible actually to look at that and say, well, you could have done this differently, or you could have made me do something differently, or you added another decision. There's been no additional decision made. There's only one decision made with a natural progression forward. That's what we're looking for. So, finally here, after nearly 40 minutes, organizational terms and phrases. This is what you've been waiting for. What words do you use, Carl? Carl, what do I use? What do I say? If there's things I can say, well, what do you use? Okay, smart Alec, what can I say that'll work? Here's what you can say. Remove. Remove is a good one, right? Which would you like to remove, X or Y? The famous one is, imagine a deck of cards, imagine a box of cards. Inside you've got red and black. Which would you like to remove, the red or the black? Well, that means both. You can remove it and look at it. You can remove it to discard it, and that's a natural flow and progression. I don't have to. What I want to avoid is I want to avoid saying, okay, which would you like to remove, the red or the black, or the numbers or the pictures, whatever it is. I give the directive, and then after that I recap. We'll talk about this later, but don't recap. This is one place where it's not good to recap. Okay, that leaves us with the, don't say that. And I've done this 1,000 times myself on many videos on this channel even. But that's bad form, right? I'm always trying to catch myself doing that and to stop doing it. This is a place where you don't really want to recap what's going on. You just want to move on and focus in the right direction. You say, what would you like to remove, the red or the black? And let's say the hit is on the red. And they say the red. And I say, great, now among the red cards. That's what you do. That's the right way to do it. I don't say, what would you like to remove, the red or the black? And they say the black. And I say, great, that leaves us with red. Don't do that. You say, what would you like to remove, the red or the black? They say the black. And you say, now these red cards in the box have blah, 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 whatever. Okay, the red cards in the box have this. Just talk about the thing you want to focus on, because the words that you've used are strong enough to allow you to do that. And that really hides the bait and switchy ugliness of the method. Okay, so remove is good. Pick out. I'll note that the word pick is really bad. Pick one. I pick that one. Well, now you possess it. That's not good, right? But if I say, I've got these things here. Let's pick one out. Now I'm describing something that sounds like remove. Let's pick one out, or let's pick out 2 of these, right? Let's pick out 2 of those. Great. So this one, I can move on, right? Because I picked these out. Let's pick out a couple of these. So let's pick out those. Okay, great. Right, I can just move on and focus on these. I don't have to bait and switch. Okay, the words are strong. Pick out, adding that word to it, that out part. Take out. Again, the addition of out improves it. If I say take one, you possess it. If I say, let's take one of these out. Now that has a different meaning, because if I take this out, it means that I've removed it. It's synonym for remove, right? If I say take out, let's take out a couple. The top in the middle or the bottom in the middle? What do we want? The bottom in the middle, great. Or let's take out a couple. What do you want? The top and the bottom? Great. Let's I don't know. Let's remove one from the table. Great. Now let's look at that. You see how this naturally flows. There's no bait and switch. The words are ambiguous enough and strong enough to mean everything I want it to mean. Isolate, I mentioned already. Which one would you like to isolate, X or Y? Okay. Separate. Go ahead and let's separate these. Right? Whatever they do, to separate something, to sort, that's another word, is sort. Sorting. Set aside. Because set aside is really good. Let's set aside one of these. Which one? That one? Okay, great. Let's set that aside. That means remove, but it also means, good, let's set this aside here. Now this, and then you can focus on it, okay? Either way, when you set something aside, if I have someone coming over to my house later after the birthday party, I might set aside a piece of cake for them. That means save it for them, okay? But also set aside means to get out of the way, means both, okay? Move or slide away. Slide one of these away. They've now either chosen it and possess it, but they didn't pick it up, right? They can possess it, I can make them possess it, or they've reduced it to that. It's a reduction, okay? So move or slide away. Conversely, push or slide back. Go ahead, slide away two. Great. Can you push one back? This means anything. It could mean that. It could mean that. I don't have to say this leaves me with. I don't have to explain this or describe it. I just focus where I want to immediately after it's done. Okay, so these are very well hidden meanings. Divide, as I said before. This is a good one because what you can do is you can add an additional question. So you can say divide these into two groups. Divide these into two even groups, right? And they go, great. And then I can follow up, any reason why you kept or moved these here? I want to focus on these. Any reason why you moved these here? They don't have a reason. And you say, no reason at all. Just because, why not, right? That's the Danny Day Ortiz, why not, right? But now I'm focusing on these. I have no reason to, but I've done it, right? They, after all, did divide them this way, right? Sort, same thing, right? Could you sort these into two even groups? Any reason why you put these over here? No reason whatsoever? Well, it's curious. Could you remove one of them from the table? Great. Let's take a look at that. I have total freedom with these words because I'm just creating an organization. I'm making a situational kind of circumstance. I'm not having them pick. I'm not giving them possession. I'm just having them organize, right? So divide, sort, dealing cards. This is a really good one. So if you have a packet of cards, or if you're forcing something that is marked, let's say you have a marked card and you know it's on the it's near the top, right? Let's say it is the top card. I'll just turn it right side up for the sake of explanation here. 7 of hearts is on top, but it's marked and I know it's on top. I could say, go ahead and deal and stop whenever you like. Great, let's take these cards. They dealt those ones out. They stopped when they liked. They've made a selection. I've made the focus on these, but I didn't have to. They could have been dealing out, let's say it's a packet of cards, and I know that it's on the bottom. Jack of clubs. Go ahead and deal and stop whenever you like. Right there? Very good. And then I just take these cards that they dealt off and I remove them. I don't say anything about it, but I've now reduced it down to that. I've made a reduction. Obviously, if there's fewer cards involved, this can be super powerful. Go ahead and deal off a few cards right here, as many as you want. Stop when you like. Right there? Good. So that has these. Could you just remove one from the table? Good. Go ahead and take a look at that one. I am not baiting and switching. I'm giving logical direction to organizational directives. Okay. So dealing cards is just like sorting. Sorting can also look like this with objects. Random sugar cube, post-it notes, deck of cards, clip, right? Got a bunch of weird, unrelated objects here. Could you just sort these into two piles? And I've got one kind of outlier. You can put it wherever you want, right? And then I say, is there any reason why you put, or actually, is it? Oh, no, that's even, okay. I could say, is there any reason why you put these here? No? Well, it's curious, because as I'm looking at these, you seem to be motivated to put these together. Why don't you slide away too? I just am arbitrarily, and we'll talk about arbitrary justification later on, but I don't have to switch if I'm not making them pick. If I'm making them sort, there's nothing to switch on them. I can just focus wherever I want to. I can forget about what I don't need and focus on what I do. So if that makes sense. So it's kind of like the dealing thing. It's the exact same thing as dealing. You deal cards down, you're really just sorting. I'm making a pile here and I'm keeping a pile here. And I can focus on the pile that's dealt, or I can focus on the pile that's here. When they sort, I can focus on either one that I want to. It doesn't really matter. You could have, a dish, have some items sitting on a dish. Could you remove some of these items from the dish and make a pile over here? Any reason why you put these ones here? Any reason why you left these ones on the dish? I get to choose the focus. It's completely invisible. Okay, and it's a better way to work. Say stop. I love this. It's a wallet. As I cast my hand over these objects, go ahead and say stop. Right here? Okay, good. I can discard what I don't want. If I'm after that, I'm down to 2, right? As I cast my hand over these objects, say stop. Right here? Right here? Okay. I hit it, right? As I cast my hand over the object, say stop anytime. Right here? Okay. Either way, it doesn't matter. I can do whatever I want, okay? So say stop. The say stop kind of force. So it's a kind of a continuum force. Either side can be used or not, or discarded or whatever. And I don't say we'll get rid of these. You just do it. You just do the logical thing. You invent on the spot. You make sense of what the outcome is without switching on them. They have done what you asked, and it has a consequence. There's many more terms and phrases like these. These are just a few. And by the way, if I give you just 7 or 8 like I've done here, that's actually more than enough. Because as we're going to talk later on, how deep should Equivoque get? This should be pretty shallow. There shouldn't be very many levels. You should do it in as few as possible. If you have 7 or 8 really good words, you have more than enough to use equivocate a couple of different times within a show or a routine of separate tricks. You have the ability to get a lot of mileage out of just a handful of words. Terms to avoid. Terms to avoid. So, look, while some of these terms are used in classical equivoque, each of them and words like these words suggest the concept of possession that requires additional explanation to reverse the meaning. If I say pick up something, I have to, and I don't want it, I have to reverse the meaning of picking it up. Picking it up means to choose it or to select it. Now I have to add a line in there that's going to reverse the meaning of what they've done. I have to say now get rid of it or something like that. Okay, I don't want to do that. These are bad words because of that. So note that some of these words can be improved though, as demonstrated in the previous list. So like take is bad, but take out is good. Or pick is bad. Pick one is bad. Pick out is better. It's a lot better, okay, because it has a organizational quality to it. So bad. Choose. Choose is bad. Choose is very bad, okay? You could potentially use the word choose in conjunction with an initial directive, but I think it's better just to give the initial directive and let it lie, rather than saying, what do you choose? I could say, remove one from the table. Which do you choose? You're still depending on removal from the table, but once you say, which do you choose, now you've assigned possession. Now they're removing it by a choice. I'm choosing this one, rather than just removing it. Okay, there's a subconscious psychological meaning there. Choose is bad. Don't do that. Choose one and put it here. That's bad. Choose one and put it here. You don't want to have to end up with and put it here, right? Take or give is bad. Take one and give it to me. Go ahead, take one and put it over there. Take one, now give it to me. I have to add an extra step in order to make it mean something, and it's not an intuitive, obvious extra step. It's completely fabricated. Point to. This one's very popular. This is so extremely popular. A lot of people, when doing equivoque, they feel that point to is really solid, but it isn't. It's really, really poor. If I say point to one, now they have possession. If you point to something, you've identified with it, that singular one. Point to one. Okay, point is pretty bad. It's pretty bad. You don't want to use it. Point to one. Now place it with the others. Point to one and give it to me. Point to one and slide it away. I always have to add another step because pointing to one does not have a natural outcome to it at all. There's no natural flow following pointing to one. I have to invent the next directive. Okay. Pick up. Again, that's a very popular one too. Pick up. Pick up one and give it to me. Okay. Remove one. And take a look at that. Remove one. Great. Slide one. See what I mean? I can focus wherever I want when I say remove. But when I say pick up, they own it. This is theirs. They have picked it up. Okay. Pick up is not very good. It's very popular, but it's weak. It's weak. Okay. Select. Select one. Go ahead, select an object and give it to me. Select an object. Okay, we'll get rid of that. Right. The telltale flaw in all of these words in equivoque is that we want to avoid, the flaw is the addition of the word and. You don't want to have that. Choose one and do this. Take one and do this. Give me one and I'll do this, right? Point to one and then we will. Pick up one and now do this. Select one and then we will. If you have to use and then add another directive to it, then the word itself is not as strong as we probably want it to be. Do I use some of these sometimes in Equivocate? Yeah, I still do. I do. And it's okay. Especially if you have like one layer of Equivocate, you could probably get away with it. But they're weak. They're pretty weak words. There's better words, okay? The ones that I talked about before. Congruence through narrative. Another way to get congruence, situational congruence, is through a narrative. And this is a lot more convoluted, and I can only speak to this so much without coming up with examples. I'll give you some existing examples. Look, obviously there is a finite number of words and concepts that can so easily and so effectively serve to replace the idea of possession with organization. There's so many words that can do that. You're not going to find very many, but like I said, 7 or 8 words is enough. But 7 or 8 words is only 7 or 8. There's not a lot of options there. In some cases, we may need to rely on a narrative to establish the congruent conditions that we're after. So ultimately, if we go back to these other tricks I talked about earlier, Joshua Jay's Inferno, and we'll say Kenton Knepper's Colossal Killer. I'll talk about Colossal Killer here at the end. But you have these 2 tricks. They're the same trick. Now, people will disagree because presentationally, they're entirely different. And even in terms of method, they could be different. In terms of effect, they're absolutely different. But they're the same trick. It's a choice of 1 in 52 that gets an improbable revelation. That's the trick. The funny thing is that almost every pick a card trick is that. A choice of 1 in 52 that gets an improbable revelation. That's a testament, by the way, to the value of presentation. Presentation is far more important than method for that reason alone. You could have the same trick 20 times over. As long as the presentation is different for each one, you have 20 different tricks. Presentation is more important than method, but I digress. In order to accomplish this through narrative, we need to play out a self-evident plot in the procedure of narrowing selections that provides congruence to ending states and meaning after free choices are made. So this approach can be very difficult to realize in many circumstances, as the sterility of making plain choices is hardly an interesting plot in itself. So like when you're just having them make decisions, that's very sterile. That's not an interesting plot. So as an alternative, we have to fabricate a plot. So I go back to these 2 tricks, right? Particularly the Infernal one. There's a plot. There's like a story that's part of it. And it's actually the nature of the story that gives you the ability to create congruence of meaning. So that's what I'm getting after, right? If you have a narrative that you can fabricate a narrative or a story, that can be very beneficial and help you to create the congruence without depending just on those list of words. For example, the selection might be of an envelope among several containing a valuable item. Okay, so you have a bunch of envelopes. One of them contains a valuable item. That's bank night. That's bank night. Okay, the very essence of the plot actually gives you some strategic ways that you can apply decision making that creates congruence of meaning without necessarily depending on the words. Now, if you're doing bank night, but you just have objects and you say one of them has a lottery ticket in it, pick one up and give it to me. Well, that doesn't make any sense. You probably have a better way that you can present that using the story, the plot itself. If you can do that, then that's better. Perhaps the valuable item in the envelope is a spectator's ring or a watch. And the elimination tool is a hammer. Now we're on to something. Okay, now we have a plot. We have a valuable item that's in an envelope, and we have a hammer. And we're going to eliminate things with the hammer. Now we can use words like reserve. So we've got these envelopes out here. Let's reserve half of these. What does that mean? Reserve is an ambiguous term, but it makes some sense because I know what I'm going to be doing with them. I've got a hammer here. Okay, I could reserve them to hit at the end, or I could reserve them not to hit. And I can set them aside. I can bash these ones. So if this has the watch in it, these are all envelopes, this has the watch in it, and say, let's pick a few of these to reserve. And they say, oh, okay, let's pick that one, and that one. I'll reserve these. And I can say, great, bang, 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 bang. I've already eliminated half, okay, just because I reserved these. If they didn't reserve the one that I want, that one right there, they say, good, why don't we reserve a few of these? What do we want? I say, this. I can say, all right, great. So we've got these over here. Bang, bang, bang. I don't have to explain it. I just had them sort by using the word reserve, okay? But a more specific way. So the Jerks wrote about this when he wrote about what he calls third wave equivoque, which kind of gets at this point, the idea of language driving things better than the directives and the bait and switch nature of it. And he used an example which was a cup crushing routine where you have a nail or a knife or a blade underneath the cup. And the example that he saw where he was thinking about this was the performer used the word safe. And he said, all right, you decide on the last one, which hand is safe? And the explanation there is that either way, you could say this hand is safe and the nail is under this hand. Let's say the nail is over here. And the spectator says, I pick this one. This is the safe one. You could say, yes, bang, it is safe, right? Or they could say, this is the safe one. You say this one, this is the safe one. So this one is under threat. Boom, right? And either way, the congruence is there. It all means the same thing. Either way they pick and choose. The word safe is the operative term. I could do that here. Which one is safe? Right? And I can say it's safe as in I'm not going to hit it, or I can say safe as in it's okay to hit it. That word, because the word is part of the danger, safeness is the contrary element to danger, that's part of the plot. The plot gives me the ability to use these words, and you're going to have to figure this out on your own with your own routine. If you have a selection process, can you create a plot that gives you the ability to use language, that gives you the ability to have congruence and meaning without having to bait and switch on them, right? Doesn't matter what they pick because you always have the congruent meaning to get to. I hope this stuff is making sense, okay? But it's just a different way of thinking about your equivoque. So again, the Jerks refers to that as third wave equivoque, is this concept of narrative to drive the verbiage that you use. It's a little bit more complicated and more complex than I think the list of words that I was giving that are organizational. At the same time, I think it gets to the same end. Organizational narratives give you organizational terms. So that's something to think about. If sorting is part of your narrative, that gives you sorting words. And then it allows you to designate what piles mean, right? Without assigning possession. That's what we're trying to avoid. The last thing here, in terms of mechanisms anyway, I think, modular add-ons. Okay, another topic. Modular add-ons. Look, we've already discussed the relationship that multiple outs has with equivoque, both as a formative component. So multiple outs is actually ingrained in the essence of equivoque, but multiple outs as a separate method can be added on to it. It's a component that can, it makes it up, but it also can layer. It's a layering tactic to add multiple outs to guarantee a very clean outcome because they're making a real free choice at the very end. Even if it's not always the same outcome, it's very clean. But there are other potential add-on methods that can help us achieve a most inevitable and fair-looking equivoque. We should always consider the place of layered forces in our execution of equivoque. So there are other forces that you can use and layer into the equivoque itself. My favorite one is the continuum force. That's what I call it, a continuum force. That's when I say I've got numbers here in a continuum. Just tell me when to stop. And I can force any number I want, because I can say, yep, I came almost all the way to the end, and I can give them a multiple out. Let's say 8 or 9. 8 or 9, what do you like? 8 or 9. It could be either one. I could have a multiple out for either one. Or they could say stop early and say, oh, all the way here at the end, it's very close to the end, we have 8 or 9 over here, right? I can do what I want. But it is an ambiguous force. In that way it's related to equivoque, but it's not equivoque. It's an equivocation of space and time. It's not an equivocation of choice necessarily, though. Okay, so you could layer in forces like that, or any force that you want. If you layer a more traditional force into the equivoque, it helps to disguise the equivoque. And likewise, the equivoque disguises the force very well, too. On one hand, the layering of methods helps to improve deception by creating twists and turns in the overall method, right? But on the other hand, inserting forcing strategies apart from equivoque can act as an insulation buffer between the inherent discrepancies that often make equivoque ugly. So when you have like 3 layers of equivoque, the discrepancies between the layers start to make it ugly. If you have other operations that happen between that might involve some other kind of choice that's irrelevant, free choices that are transparent and are absolutely true. You can have really true choices of something else in between, and that really will help to disguise it. Or you can have other forces. Either way, right? That gets me to this point. Another thing is I call the shell of truth. The shell of truth is so useful in equivoque. The shell of truth, in a nutshell, is giving the spectator real, free, honest choices. So if I'm doing any card at any number, which we'll do here at the very end, if I'm doing any card at any number, I could have them choose a card fairly. Make a bunch of selections. I say you have red or black. What do you want? And whatever you choose is what we use. I promise you. Red or black. They say black. We will use black. Spades or clubs. What do you want? Clubs. We will use clubs. Numbers or picture cards. Which one do you want? Numbers. Great. Odd or even? Odd. What? You got 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Which one do you want? 3. 3 of clubs. There it is, right? And you honestly chose everything, and it was absolutely transparent. And now I've done that, and if I do a couple layers of equivoque on top of that, the equivoque is very well buried because everything else was honest. And I say, let's continue with this. And now I do a couple layers of equivoque. Now, I said whatever you say is what we will do. That is not the same thing as I could say, and like before, whatever you say is what we will do. That's not the same thing as saying whatever you choose is what we will use. But it sounds the same, doesn't it? Whatever you say is what we will do. Go ahead and remove one from the coffee table. That's what they did. Now take a look at it. Right? I'm now into this. I've made fair questions and fair choices that they've had that are absolutely transparent. There's no way they weren't fair. And now that I'm doing equivoque, the equivoque now looks fair because everything else was fair. Okay, so a shell of truth. I really like that. If you can find a way to have real honest choices made that are absolutely verifiable, you will make the equivoque look better. So modular add-ons. Add forces, add procedure in between to separate the equivoque, add completely fair selections to create a shell of truth. So those are some concepts to add on to your equivoque to improve it. Anything else on that? We actually do this flim-flammery anyway. It seems like a lot of flim-flam. You can, by the way, speaking of flim-flam, another layer, one more thing you can layer in is justified arbitration. I really like this. That's whenever you can, there's a couple ways to do this. you can have the spectator make a choice early on, and then you can just apply that same choice later on, even though you never ask them again. We actually do our justified arbitration all the time. If you say pick a number between 1 and 6, that's justified arbitration because I've eliminated 1 and 6. I said between 1 and 6. It means 2, 3, 4, 5. Danny Day Ortiz does one that he uses. He'll say, pick a number between 1 and 20, but make it high. Right? Well, that must mean 17, 18, 19, or 20. I mean, it's not very high already. But he does this all the time. Pick a number between 1 and 20, something high. Something difficult, that's what he says. Something high, something difficult. Well, you've pigeonholed them. You have justified an arbitrary limitation. You could call this arbitrary limitation, is another way to put it. That's a really great layer. It does seem like flim-flammery, and it is flim-flammery, but it's really effective if you insert it at the right time. Really free choices going on that are verifiably true. A little bit of equivoque, and somewhere in there I did a little bit of flim-flam justified arbitration. And if you do all three of those things, then it's going to be really hard to trace what's going on. That's the idea. The last thing, this is the last thing. Break it up. Break it up. One time I was performing a variation of the colossal killer effect that I referred to earlier, right? It's that 1 in 52 card in a wallet. And they pick a card and it ends up being the card that you carry in your wallet. That's the effect. And I got to the point in my equivoque procedure, I was using equivoque to do this, where I mentioned that we had picture cards. I said, we have picture cards, Jack, Queen, and King. And the spectator I was dealing with immediately said, ooh, I want the Queen of Spades. They just said it. They just decided on their own. I said, now we've got the picture cards, Jack, Queens, and Jack, Queens, and King. And they said, I want the Queen of Spades. Ooh, I want that one. And fortunately, my final layer was a 4-way out for all the queens, and they happened to name one of the outs I had. So I was okay. It didn't mess me up, but it certainly got me thinking. It got me thinking about the way I do my equivoque, particularly with some spectators that get really excited, right? The best solution I've determined is to break up the procedure between people. So what that means is that you can ask one spectator one question, and then you ask another spectator another one, so that no one person has control. So I would say, now for you, we have Jacks, Queens, and Kings. So what would you like to remove, the men or the ladies? Right? They say the men. Great. And you say, okay, so for you, we have the suits. I move to somebody else. So if it's established at the beginning that different people are going to be making different decisions, no one person can leapfrog on the procedure. It's just not available to them to do that. And I'm justified in stopping them and preventing them. I can say, no, hold on, he's got some decisions to make here too. I can do that kind of a thing. So that's the best solution I had. The only other alternative you have in this situation, if you only have one specter, for example, is to be very specific with them and very methodical. So like if I were to revisit that, I could have said something different. I could have said, now forget the colors and suits for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine these remaining pictures of ladies and men. That's very specific and very leading, but that would have prevented the spectator from jumping to conclusions, right? Forget about the colors and the suits. I don't want you to think about colors and suits. Forget about the colors and suits for a moment. I want you to close your eyes. Now they're listening to my voice and they're being compliant. And I want you to imagine these pictures of ladies and men. Now I've really controlled the spectator and prevented them from getting ahead. So any way that you can be very specific is probably good. If you can really control the spectator's actions and their thought process, you can prevent that kind of an outcome where they jump ahead and they mess up your decision making. So yeah, this approach, it ties the spectator up in activity whenever you do that. And it requires compliance and concentration. So in this mode, a spectator is limited to more finite concepts and confined to directions that will better prevent any unwanted leapfrogging that could happen. So last thing. This is the last thing. Let's not get carried away. Okay, if you're going to do Equivoque and you like what I've been saying here, and a lot of these things resonate with you, and this has got you thinking about the way you do this, the last thing I want to say to you is let's not get carried away. Okay. Lastly, we need to recognize that better Equivoque directives, better words, better narratives, better approaches, thoughtful control, all this stuff, all these treatments, all these layers, adding layers to your Equivoque, all this stuff does not give us a license to do more Equivoque within the routine. Just because we're doing it better does not mean that you should do more of it. It's like saying, I'm going to go on a diet and I'm going to eat good, healthy food. That works if you eat less food that is good and healthy. It doesn't work if you eat healthy food but an enormous amount of it, right? If I eat just salad, that's great, but it needs to be a bowl of salad. It can't be a bowl of salad loaded with chickpeas and protein and fattening dressing in a large quantity. That doesn't work, okay? The license that we get from better Equivoque is just the license to do better tricks. It's not a license to do more Equivoque, okay? So don't do more. Don't get carried away. Regardless of the strength in our approach, the goal remains to do as little as possible to get the desired result, right? I think ideally even with bad Equivoque, you don't want to do more than 2 or 3 tiers. With very good Equivoque, you don't want to do more than 2 or 3 tiers. That has not changed. You want to do as little as possible to get there. If I can do it in 1 layer in a really solid multiple out, then that's what I should do. Don't bother with 2 layers if I can do this and do a multiple out and that gets me there. The multiple out is a better strategy because it gives free choice, and the layer of Equivoque allowed me to get to that point where I could have manageable outs. That is the better sequence. Just because my Equivoque is better doesn't mean I should say, I shouldn't do this multiple out thing. No, that's better. Do that. That is definitely better. That is a better strategy that eliminates the ability to see through Equivoque. If I can do Equivoque in 1 layer, it's impossible to see because you don't have context, especially if the words are good and if the narrative is good and it's very thoughtful, if it's well scripted, right? If it's pick one up and give it to me, we know that, right? But if it's remove a book from the table, I cannot conclude just from seeing that it was Equivoque. I don't have enough information. It's covert enough. Okay. If you can't get there without using up to 3 layers of Equivoque, then you definitely need to pursue a remarkable layering of verifiable choices, a shell of truth, or additional methods to give the sequence adequate cover. Okay, so that's the end of it. That's everything that I have to say about this and the way I approach it. Organizational terms. Use organizational terms. Use multiple layers to get there. Think situationally. Think about conditions that you're creating in your questions. Don't think about, do not approach possession. Possession is a final, finite concept. It is not something that should ever show up in the procedure of doing Equivoque. No one should have possession of anything. They should be sorting things. They should be moving things. They should be organizing things. If not actually, then mentally. Let's try something. I got a deck of cards here, and I want you to make a selection. And look, whatever you say is what you get. Whatever you say is what we will use. Okay. You've got red and black cards. You want red or black? Red. You've got hearts and diamonds. What do you want? Hearts or diamonds? Diamonds. Okay. You've got number cards and picture cards. What do you want? Do you want number cards or do you want to consider the picture cards? We have number cards. Ace here, right? You've got numbers 1 through 10. 1 through 10. I'll just ask you for the sake of time, which one do you want? Because whatever you say is what we will use, right? That's what I promised you. 1 through 10. What do you want? 7. So you have the 7 of diamonds. 7 of diamonds. Okay. Great. Let's again, whatever you say is what we will do. I promise you all the way through. Do you want to use the higher cards or the lower cards in the deck? The higher cards? Okay, the higher numbers we'll use. We don't want to go too high. Let's say you've got, the 30s and 40s. Which group would you remove? The 30s or the 40s? The 30s? Okay, we'll take out the 30s. You're looking at the 30s in there. Okay, you have the whole sequence of 30s. In fact, imagine a continuum right here. As I move my hand, go ahead and say stop anytime. Right here, you're just kind of over halfway through. I would say it's kind of like around 6 or 7. 6 or 7. What do you want? 6 or 7? You pick. Again, whatever you say is what we use. 6, very good. You've got 36, right? 7 of diamonds, 36. This deck. Look, this has been totally fair. Everything you said is exactly what we did. Everything. I've had this deck sitting out in full view the entire time. I may or may not have shuffled it before I put it in. Doesn't matter, okay? But it's been sitting here. I'm not even going to touch it. I want you to go ahead and take those cards out. Make sure you get them all. Don't mix them up. Don't drop any. Got one sitting in here. Don't drop any cards, okay? And I want you to cut. We're gonna deal up. We're gonna cut off 36 cards, just like you said, exactly like you said. Go ahead, deal face up right there. 36 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. That's 36 cards. That's what you said. It's exactly what you wanted. What you said is what we did. You cut 36 cards from that deck, which was sitting in full view the entire time, and I have not touched it. You touched it. You're the only one. What was the card you decided on? The 7 of diamonds. Go ahead and take a look at where we're at. 7 of diamonds. Okay? This is pure Equivoque Bergloss effect. Any card at any number. And what's great about it is, at least for magicians, is that the part that we always want to try to equivocate and force was totally fair. They literally pick exactly the card that they want. They could have said 7 of diamonds right off the bat. But I want them to pick methodically, fairly, truly fairly. No gimmicks to this, no equivoque. I want them to pick fairly red, black, suit, number, picture, number, or, court value, whatever. I want them to pick all of that fairly, because that is the shell of truth that's going to hide the tiny bit of equivoque that I'm going to do. But I didn't just do equivoque. And the equivoque that I did do had no concept of possession in it, ever. What was the equivoque that I did? I said, would you like to use the higher or lower cards in the deck? This is an ambiguous term. I did say use, but I said higher or lower cards in the deck. And in this case, they say higher. I say, great, we'll go with the higher numbers. And I define that right there. I did not bait and switch on them. I gave a logical end to the organization. Higher numbers. Okay. If they said lower, I say, great, we'll go really deep into the deck to these higher numbers. Either way, right? If they say lower cards, because I said higher or lower cards in the deck, and they say lower, I say, great, we'll go really deep. Lower is in deep. We'll go really deep into the deck into these higher numbers, but we don't want to go too high. Justified arbitration. This is another layer, totally different approach, right? Justified arbitration. But we don't want to go too high. Let's say the 30s or the 40s, which happens to be where I need to get. I need to get to I need to get to 37. Okay, 30s or 40s. Which one would you like to remove, the 30s or the 40s? I'm using remove. Remove. I'm not giving possession. Remove does not mean take possession. It just means to take, to sort out from here. What do you like to remove, the 30s or the 40s? If they remove the 40s, I say, great, we'll remove the 40s. So now we have the 30s, and you're looking at the 30s in front. In fact, imagine a continuum of numbers here. And as I move my hand, just say stop. I'm going to force 7, one way or the other. But what I can force is a multiple out, another layer, another layer. I'm using justified arbitration. I'm using the layer of equivoque that I had for the groupings. I used equivoque to get the exact group of 10s that I wanted. 2 layers is the only 2 layers I have. Yeah, that's it. So now I've got my force here, an additional continuum force. I want to get 7, but I'm gonna get 6 and 7. So I go, and it doesn't matter where they say stop. If I get all the way to the end, I just use make sure we don't get all the way off the end, right? Try that again. So go ahead, say stop anytime. Say stop. And I might get forceful and say stop. And if they stop me even here early, I say, okay, good. We're not quite to the middle. We're over here just outside of the middle, around 6 or 7. Not really sure. In fact, which one do you want? Whatever you choose is what we use. Remember, now they have a fair choice, which is a multiple out. If they say 6, I'm going to have them cut 6 cards. I'll have them deal 6 cards, and then it leaves them where they're at. If they say 7, I will have them deal 6, and I say the 37th card, and that's it. And part of this has to do, this technique has to do with magicians getting over themselves, right? And saying, oh, but you're doing 1 shy. Yeah, I am, because it works extremely well. Like that's a method. Use it. Don't get rid of it just because you don't like it for yourself. You know what I mean? Use it. Use that method. This is totally equivoque, Berglas effect, any card at any number. It's and the multiple out is hands off. I don't have to touch the cards. Right? So I just have to have a way to get to 1 before and the 1 at, using just a few techniques. And what's really good about this is that it's so covert on the number side. I almost could on a different day perform this again for the same person. They would not necessarily recognize. Now, I wouldn't do that, but I could probably perform this in front of a person I've done this before a day later, even an hour later, and they would not necessarily see the discrepancies that are in there because they're too small. They're too little. But anyway, that's a way in which we can improve our equivoque and make it, I think, as strong as it really can be, using a number of different perspectives. Think more about your words that you're using and the manner in which you're using your equivoque. Make it situational. Make it organizational. Think more on conditions rather than possession. Add other methods and layers into it. Don't just don't just use Equivoque. Insert other layers to it that hide the method or improve upon it. Get separation. Involve more spectators in your Equivoque to get better control. Anyway, that's it. That's the whole thing. This is everything I can think of to say about this and the way that I think about Equivoque. Yeah, an hour, just almost over an hour and a half. Hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully this got your brain thinking a little bit more. Kind of deep dive on this subject. And we probably will never get this deep again on the subject of Equivoque on this channel, but there it is. So good luck with that and happy magicking.